Why the Taliban turned stadiums into execution grounds. When the Taliban first emerged in the mid-1990s, Afghanistan was fractured by years of internal conflict. Rival armed groups controlled different regions, roads were unsafe, and civilian life was shaped by uncertainty. In this environment, the Taliban presented themselves as a force that would restore order through strict religious rule and decisive justice. Their promise of stability appealed to communities exhausted by violence. But the methods they used to enforce that order quickly revealed a system built on fear as much as control. As territories came under their authority, the Taliban established local courts run by clerics loyal to the movement. These courts operated with speed and finality. There were no defense lawyers, no publicly available legal codes, and little opportunity to appeal. Accusations were heard quickly, often based on limited testimony. Verdicts followed within hours. Sentences were frequently carried out the same day. Justice, as defined by the system, was immediate and visible. Visibility was not incidental. Punishments were deliberately staged in public places, stadiums, marketplaces, crossroads, and village squares. Announcements spread by word of mouth or local officials ensured that crowds gathered. Attendance was rarely optional. Community members were expected to witness what happened. Being present signaled obedience. Absence could draw suspicion. One of the most recognized sites for these events was a large sports stadium in Kabul. Once used for matches and public celebrations, it became a setting where punishments were carried out before thousands. The transformation of the space itself sent a message. Everyday civic life now existed under a different authority. The field where games had been played became a stage for judgment. The types of punishments reflected the Taliban's interpretation of religious law. Theft could lead to amputation. Accusations of adultery or certain moral offenses could result in execution. Murder convictions were sometimes answered with public shootings. Each event followed a structured sequence. The accused was brought forward. The sentence was announced. The punishment was carried out. The crowd was dismissed. The ritual repeated in different places, reinforcing the pattern. These public punishments served more than a legal function. They acted as demonstrations of power. Each event showed that the authorities could reach to any community, define wrongdoing, and impose irreversible consequences. The effect spread beyond the individual case. Fear moved through families, neighborhoods, and entire districts. Daily behavior adjusted accordingly. Men avoided disputes that might bring them before local judges. Women limited their presence in public spaces, aware that accusations related to morality carried severe penalties. Families instructed children not to speak about what they had seen. Conversations shifted into private spaces. Silence became a protective habit. Uncertainty amplified the fear. Because legal standards were not written or widely explained, people could not predict how rules would be applied. Similar accusations could lead to different outcomes depending on the judge or location. This unpredictability encouraged constant caution. When boundaries are unclear, self-censorship expands. Women were especially affected. Rules governing dress, movement, and social interaction placed them under continuous scrutiny. A woman seen outside without a male relative or accused of inappropriate contact could face punishment that was both physical and public. These cases reinforced broader control over female behavior, sending a message that personal conduct was subject to collective judgment. Children grew up witnessing these events as part of communal life. Attendance at public punishments sometimes included entire families. Young people saw floggings, amputations, or executions in spaces that might otherwise have been associated with games or markets. Over time, such exposure shaped their understanding of authority. Power became linked with the capacity to inflict pain openly and without challenge. When the Taliban lost control of major cities in the early 2000s, large public punishments temporarily became less visible. However, in rural areas where the movement retained influence, similar practices continued on a smaller scale. Informal courts handled disputes and accusations. Bodies were sometimes left in public places as warnings. Even without large crowds, the principle of visible consequence remained. During the years of insurgency, observers reported the existence of shadow courts in districts beyond strong government control. These courts met in private homes or local religious buildings, delivering swift judgments and harsh penalties. Executions and beatings were used to enforce obedience and discourage collaboration with rival authorities. Fear continued to function as a governing tool, even outside formal state structures. As the Taliban regained territory and eventually returned to national power, public punishments again became more frequent and open. Officials announced the re-establishment of their judicial system. Trials were described as brief and rooted in religious law. Independent observers, however, reported that defendants often lacked legal representation and that standards of evidence were unclear. Floggings were among the most common visible punishments. Groups of men and women were brought before assembled crowds and struck a set number of times. The events were framed as moral correction. Their broader impact, however, lay in the public reminder that personal behavior was subject to physical enforcement. The crowd served as witness and audience. Executions also resumed in certain provinces. Individuals convicted of murder were shot before local communities after sentences were approved by senior leadership. Officials presented these acts as justice carried out on behalf of victims' families. Human rights organizations questioned the fairness of the proceedings, but the public nature of the executions ensured that their psychological effect extended far beyond the specific cases. Women continued to face disproportionate risk under accusations related to morality. Restrictions on education, employment, and movement placed them under close observation. Public punishments involving women reinforced gender-based control, signaling that female conduct remained a central focus of enforcement. This shaped how families managed daughters' lives, often through increased confinement and caution. The repeated use of public punishment altered the meaning of shared spaces. A square where an execution had taken place was no longer neutral ground. People moved through it more quickly, spoke more quietly, and remembered what had occurred there. Public space became associated with surveillance and potential judgment rather than simple gathering. For Taliban authorities, the visibility of punishment was essential. A sentence carried out in private would influence only a few. A sentence carried out before hundreds or thousands influenced entire communities. Fear became a form of communication, spreading without the need for constant force. Memory did much of the work. At the same time, reliance on spectacle revealed a governing approach rooted in intimidation rather than broad participation. When authority depends heavily on public displays of suffering, it signals concern about compliance. Punishment becomes performance, designed to maintain order through caution and silence. International criticism of these practices has had limited practical effect. Taliban officials frame their actions as adherence to religious duty and internal law, rejecting outside condemnation as interference. This stance reinforces internal unity among supporters while isolating the country from much of the global community. Across different periods of Taliban control, the pattern remains consistent. Punishment is not only a response to alleged crime, but a visible ritual that defines the limits of behavior. The individual accused is part of the event, but the larger audience, the crowd compelled to watch, is the true target. Each spectacle reinforces the understanding that authority is both present and willing to act without delay. Over time, these repeated experiences shape how people move, speak, and make decisions. Fear becomes woven into daily routines. It influences how loudly someone laughs, whether a woman walks alone, or how openly a man voices disagreement. Public punishment leaves marks not only on those who are sentenced, but on the social fabric around them.